September 3, 1941. Federal District Court, Brooklyn, New York. 14 men sat in the defendant's box, listening as the jury foreman rose to deliver the verdict. Guilty. All 14 counts of espionage. Guilty on every charge. The Duquesne Spy Ring, 33 German agents in total, had just been sentenced to serve a combined 300 years in American prisons. The largest espionage case in United States history that ended in convictions was over. Among the evidence presented at trial were photographs. Photographs of a new type of bomb being produced at the DuPont plant in Wilmington, Delaware. Specifications for military equipment. Ship sailing schedules. Reports on American defensive preparations. The spies had been collecting industrial intelligence, documenting what America was building, where it was being built, and how much was being produced. But there was something they had not collected. Something they could not have known in September 1941 because it did not yet exist. 25 miles west of Detroit, on 4 flat acres of Michigan farmland outside the village of Ypsilanti, construction crews were preparing to pour concrete for what would become the largest war factory in the world. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The building would be called Willow Run. 3.5 million square feet of factory space, designed by Albert Kahn, the industrial architect who had revolutionized factory design for Ford Motor Company. The plant's purpose was to produce B-24 Liberator heavy bombers using automobile assembly line techniques. Charles Sorensen, Ford's vice president of production, had promised the Army Air Forces something that aviation experts considered impossible: 1 complete bomber every hour. 4 engines, over 1.5 million individual parts, a wingspan of 110 feet, assembled with the same efficiency that Ford produced automobiles. The experts said it could not be done. Aircraft were too complex. They required skilled craftsmen, careful assembly, constant design modifications. You could not mass-produce an airplane the way you mass-produced a car. Sorensen had visited Consolidated Aircraft's facility in San Diego in January 1941 to observe B-24 production. What he saw appalled him. Workers assembling aircraft outdoors on steel fixtures, engines being hung using a surveyor's transit mounted on a pickup truck, 4 hours to install a single engine. The process was slow, inefficient, completely unsuited to the scale of production America would need if the war came to its shores. Sorensen spent an evening in his hotel room working out a better system. He broke the B-24 into essential units: wings, fuselage sections, tail assembly, engine mounts. Each unit would be produced separately on dedicated assembly lines, then brought together in precise sequence to create one complete aircraft. He sketched the layout on hotel stationery. By morning, he had designed Willow Run. The Army Air Forces, desperate for bombers, awarded Ford a contract based on those pencil sketches. Construction began in April 1941. By December, when Japanese aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor and America entered the war, Willow Run was taking shape. The main factory building was L-shaped, nearly a mile long on its longest axis. Inside, parallel assembly lines would produce major components. Turntables would rotate completed subassemblies 90 degrees to accommodate the corner in the building's shape. The final assembly line would move continuously, bringing together wings, fuselage, tail, engines, landing gear, instruments, armament. 1 complete B-24 Liberator rolling out the factory door every 63 minutes. That was the promise. The reality in 1942 was very different. Willow Run struggled. The plant produced only 56 aircraft in all of 1942. Design changes from the Army disrupted production. Workers needed training. The facility itself required modifications. Critics began calling it Will It Run? Senator Harry Truman visited twice to investigate reports of waste and inefficiency. He demanded finished bombers, not excuses. Ford's management explained the difficulties. The B-24 was not a fixed design. The Army kept requesting modifications. Each change required retooling, assembly lines, retraining workers, Recalculating production schedules. You cannot run an assembly line efficiently when the product keeps changing. But German intelligence in 1942 was not focused on Willow Run's problems. German intelligence was focused on whether American industrial mobilization represented a genuine threat to the Reich. In Berlin, German military leaders were analyzing reports from agents operating in the United States, Mexico, and South America. The reports contained information extracted from American newspapers, technical journals, corporate correspondence. Some data came from agents who had successfully infiltrated American defense contractors. The Duquesne network had obtained specifications for military equipment before the FBI arrested them. Other networks remained operational, at least temporarily. The intelligence summaries reaching Berlin described American production claims that German analysts considered propaganda. In May 1940, President Franklin Roosevelt had announced production goals: 185,000 aircraft, 120,000 tanks, enormous quantities of ships, guns, ammunition. Adolf Hitler's advisors told him these figures were impossible. Ridiculous American boasting designed to intimidate Germany and reassure Britain. The numbers were fantasy. America was still suffering economically from the Great Depression. American industry lacked the capacity for such production. The claims were lies. This assessment was catastrophically wrong, but in 1942, German confidence seemed justified by events. German U-boats were sinking Allied merchant vessels faster than the Allies could replace them. The Atlantic was becoming a German lake. German armies controlled Europe from the Atlantic coast to the gates of Moscow. German tactical superiority had defeated every opponent. Why should German leadership fear American industrial capacity when German military power dominated the known world? The man who understood the danger was Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service. Canaris had spent years before the war directing intelligence collection on American economic capacity. The Abwehr had established networks to gather information on American factories, raw material supplies, production processes, transportation infrastructure. The data reaching Berlin through these channels told a disturbing story. American industrial capacity was vastly larger than German capacity. If America fully mobilized for war, German industry could not match American output, not even close. Canaris recognized what he called the capacity of American industrial power. He understood that modern warfare between industrial nations was ultimately decided by production. An army without adequate supplies cannot sustain combat operations regardless of tactical skill or soldier courage. German military doctrine emphasized speed, maneuver, concentrated force. Blitzkrieg. Quick victories using superior tactics and operational planning. But Blitzkrieg required logistical support, fuel for tanks, ammunition for guns, replacement parts for vehicles, food for soldiers. If the war became a long contest of attrition, German logistics would collapse against an opponent with superior industrial capacity. By mid-1943, Canaris's fears were being realized. American production was exceeding even Roosevelt's ambitious goals. In 1941, the United States had produced approximately 19,000 combat aircraft. In 1942, that number reached roughly 48,000. In 1943, approximately 86,000. These were real numbers, not propaganda. American factories were producing finished military equipment at rates that seemed impossible to German analysts who still believed in 1939's assessments. And Willow Run was beginning to hit its stride. After struggling through 1942, Ford's management made critical adjustments. They simplified production processes. They improved worker training. They negotiated with the Army to reduce design change frequency. They perfected the assembly line choreography that brought thousands of parts together in precise sequence. By mid-1944, Willow Run was producing B-24 Liberators at a rate that would have seemed like science fiction just 3 years earlier. The production rate that Sorensen had promised, 1 complete bomber every 63 minutes, 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, shifts changing, while assembly lines continued moving. workers riveting aluminum skin to airframe structures, technicians installing complex hydraulic systems, electricians running miles of wiring through fuselage compartments, mechanics bolting 4 Pratt & Whitney engines onto wing mounts, armourers installing machine gun turrets. Each B-24 had over 1.5 million parts. Every part had to be manufactured to specification, delivered to the assembly line at the correct moment, installed in the correct location, inspected for quality. The logistical choreography was staggering, and Ford made it work. September 1944. Willow Run employees celebrated the completion of their 6,000th airplane. Production had reached 650 planes per month. 1 bomber every 63 minutes was no longer an optimistic promise. It was daily reality. The massive L-shaped factory operated continuously. Raw materials entered at one end. Finished B-24. Liberators rolled out the other end, engines running, ready to fly to modification centers where they received specific equipment for their assigned theaters of operation. The aircraft themselves were remarkable machines. The B-24 Liberator had a range exceeding 2,000 miles. It could carry 8,000 pounds of bombs. It cruised at 175 miles per hour at 25,000 feet altitude. 10 crew members operated the aircraft. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, flight engineer, radio operator, 4 gunners manning defensive machine gun positions. The B-24 was faster than the B-17. Flying Fortress, carried more bombs, flew longer distances. It was the most produced American military aircraft of World War II. By war's end, over 18,000 B-24 seconds would be manufactured. Half of them would come from Willow Run. But individual aircraft, production numbers did not tell the complete story of American industrial mobilization. The complete story was about system-level capacity, the ability to produce not just bombers but everything required to sustain global warfare. Engines, instruments, radios, machine guns, ammunition, spare parts, training aircraft for pilots, transport aircraft for supplies. The entire industrial ecosystem that transformed raw materials into finished weapons systems and delivered them to combat zones on multiple continents simultaneously. Consider the engines. Each B-24 required 4 Pratt & Whitney R1830 twin Wasp radial engines, 14 cylinders per engine, 1,200 horsepower per engine. Pratt & Whitney produced over 173,000 R1830 engines during the war, not just for B-24 seconds, also for Douglas C-47 transport aircraft, Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters, numerous other platforms. American engine manufacturing capacity exceeded German capacity by factors that German planners found difficult to accept even when confronted with documented evidence. Or consider aluminum. Aircraft construction required enormous quantities of aluminum. A single B-24 used approximately 31,000 pounds of aluminum. Producing 650 B-24 seconds per month at Willow Run alone required over 20 million pounds of aluminum monthly just for that single factory. American aluminum production in 1944 exceeded 1.5 million tons. Germany produced approximately 250,000 tons. The ratio was 6-1. America was producing 6 times more aluminum than Germany, and aluminum was just one material among thousands required for military production. German intelligence collected data on American industrial capacity throughout the war. Reports reached Berlin documenting American production rates, factory locations, transportation networks. The intelligence was accurate. German analysts could see the numbers. They could calculate the implications. But German leadership struggled to accept what the data showed. The figures seemed impossible. How could American industry produce such quantities while German industry, fully mobilized since 1939, struggled to maintain output under constant Allied bombing? The answer was that American industrial capacity had been vastly underestimated. Before the war, German analysts viewed America as economically weak, politically divided, militarily unprepared. These assessments were based on America in the 1930s. Great Depression, unemployment, isolationist politics, a small peacetime military. German intelligence failed to understand that American industrial infrastructure remained intact beneath economic problems. The factories existed, the machine tools existed, the skilled workforce existed, the transportation networks existed, the raw materials existed in abundance. All that was required was activation. Roosevelt's industrial mobilization accomplished that activation. By late 1943, American factories were producing war materials at rates that exceeded the combined output of Germany and Japan. This was the reality that German military intelligence reported to Berlin. This was the reality that Albert Speer confronted when he analyzed American production statistics in his role as Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production. This was the reality that made German defeat mathematically inevitable once the industrial disparity became established. But in September 1944, with Willow Run producing a bomber every 63 minutes, German armies still controlled vast territories. German soldiers still fought with skill and courage. German commanders still executed sophisticated tactical maneuvers. The Wehrmacht remained a formidable military force. What the Wehrmacht lacked was sustainable logistics. And sustainable logistics required industrial capacity that Germany did not possess. The question that would haunt German military leaders in the final months of the war was whether different intelligence could have changed the outcome. If German leadership had understood in 1939 what they knew in 1944, would they have pursued the same strategies? If Hitler had received accurate intelligence about American industrial potential before declaring war in December 1941, would he have made the same decision? If German military planners had visited Willow Run in September 1944 and watched a B-24 roll off the assembly line every 63 minutes, hour after hour, shift after shift, day after day, would they have understood what that production rate represented? One bomber every 63 minutes was not just a statistic. It was evidence of systematic industrial capacity operating at scales German planners considered theoretically impossible. It demonstrated American ability to apply mass production, techniques perfected in the automotive industry to complex military hardware. It showed that American factories could maintain quality standards while achieving quantity that made German production look artisanal by comparison. And it proved that American industrial mobilization was real, sustainable, and expanding. German intelligence knew about Willow Run. Intelligence reports mentioned the facility. But knowing that a factory existed was different from comprehending what that factory's output meant for the strategic balance. German analysts could read statistics. They could not always interpret implications. Production numbers on paper did not convey the psychological impact of standing inside that massive L-shaped building, watching assembly lines move continuously, seeing thousands of workers performing choreographed tasks, observing complete aircraft emerging from organized chaos every 63 minutes. That psychological impact would come later, when American bombers appeared over German cities in formations numbering hundreds of aircraft, when Luftwaffe pilots realized they were outnumbered 10-1 in airspace over their own country, when German soldiers captured American equipment and examined manufacturing quality that suggested unlimited industrial resources, when German prisoners of war received better rations in American captivity than they had received as combat soldiers, when German military leaders finally understood that they were fighting an opponent whose industrial capacity made German defeat inevitable. May 18, 1945. Flensburg, Germany. Paul Nitze sat across a table from Albert Speer, interrogating him about German war production and the effects of Allied strategic bombing. Speer had been Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production since February 1942. For 3 years, Speer had controlled German war industry. He knew German production capabilities better than anyone, and he knew American production capabilities from intelligence reports that had reached his ministry throughout the war. Nitze asked Speer about when German leadership understood American industrial capacity. Speer paused before answering. He said that in the early years of the war, Hitler and the German High Command did not take American production seriously. They viewed Roosevelt's announced goals as propaganda. When Roosevelt said America would produce 60,000 aircraft in 1942 and 125,000 in 1943, German military advisors dismissed the numbers as impossible boasting. They were wrong. The numbers were not fantasy. They were underestimates. Speer continued. By late 1943, when intelligence reports showed American production reaching levels far beyond Roosevelt's original goals, Speer understood with absolute certainty that Germany had already lost the war, not because of any battle or campaign, not because of German strategic errors or tactical failures, but because Germany's industrial capacity was eclipsed by overwhelming American material superiority. There was no scenario, no possible strategy, no wonder weapon, no tactical brilliance that could overcome such massive disparity in production. Nietzsche made notes. This was the information he had come to obtain. Verification that strategic bombing combined with industrial superiority had been decisive. Confirmation that material capacity ultimately determined modern warfare outcomes. Understanding that could guide American strategy in the Pacific War still raging against Japan, and for potential future conflicts where industrial mobilization might again become critical. Speer provided specifics. Total American aircraft production from 1941 to 1945 exceeded 300,000 planes. Germany produced approximately 119,000. American tank production exceeded 88,000. Germany produced approximately 49,000. The United States built approximately 2,700 major naval vessels. Germany built fewer than 100 major surface warships. In every category of military production, American output exceeded German output by factors of 2 to 1 or greater. But it was not just quantity. It was speed. The rate at which American factories turned out finished weapons. Speer described visiting captured American equipment depots, seeing supplies stacked in abundance, ammunition, fuel, food, medical supplies. Everything organized, everything available, everything suggesting industrial capacity operating without resource constraints. German logistics, by contrast, operated on permanent crisis. Every supply dump was critical, every fuel truck was precious, every ration was counted. The Wehrmacht functioned on the edge of collapse constantly. Nietzsche asked about specific American facilities. Did German intelligence track individual factory production? Speer said. Yes. Intelligence reports mentioned major facilities, tank production at the Detroit Arsenal, aircraft production at various locations, shipbuilding on both coasts. The reports contained accurate information, but accuracy was not the same as comprehension. German analysts could document what America was producing. They struggled to accept the strategic implications. One facility Speer mentioned specifically was Ford's Willow Run bomber plant. Intelligence reports described it as the largest war factory in the world, 3.5 million square feet, producing B-24 Liberators using assembly line techniques. The reports mentioned production rates. The numbers seemed exaggerated. German analysts questioned whether any facility could actually produce complex aircraft that quickly. But the numbers were accurate. Willow Run was indeed producing one complete bomber every 63 minutes at peak operation. Speer paused. He said that figure represented something German industry could never have achieved. Not because German engineers lacked skill, not because German workers lacked discipline, but because German industrial infrastructure lacked the systematic capacity for such production. American automobile manufacturers had spent decades perfecting mass production techniques, moving assembly lines, interchangeable parts, standardized processes. When they converted to military production, they brought that expertise. German aircraft production remained based on skilled craftsmen carefully assembling components. Quality was high, speed was slow. The interrogation continued. Nietzsche asked about other bombing targets. Speer explained that attacks on ball-bearing production, aircraft factories, many precision targets had achieved limited results. Germany had worked around those losses through dispersal, redundancy, substitution. But the campaign against oil had worked. The systematic destruction of synthetic fuel plants from May 1944 onward had crippled, The Wehrmacht. Without fuel, German military effectiveness dropped by approximately 80% in the final months of the war. All of Speer's production achievements became meaningless. You can build tanks and aircraft, but if you cannot fuel them, cannot move them, cannot train operators to use them, they are useless metal. Speer's production miracle had tripled German output under his leadership, but every gain was meaningless because American production increased by larger absolute numbers. In 1944 alone, the United States produced 96,000 aircraft. Germany's best year was 39,000. The ratio was worse than 2-to-1. And that disparity existed across every category of military equipment. Germany was sprinting on a treadmill, running faster but falling further behind an opponent whose industrial capacity expanded continuously. The conversation shifted to Hitler's final days. Speer described visiting Hitler in the Berlin bunker on April 23, 1945. One of the last people to see the Führer alive. Hitler was physically deteriorating, trembling, issuing impossible orders to armies that no longer existed. Convinced that willpower alone could still achieve victory, that German spirit would overcome material disadvantage, that determination, courage, and ideological conviction could defeat American bombers and Soviet tanks. Speer said it was madness. Spirit does not stop bombs. Willpower does not manufacture fuel. Determination does not build tanks. Nitze concluded the interrogation session. He had obtained what he needed. Confirmation that strategic bombing had been decisive when properly targeted. Understanding that material superiority was foundational to modern warfare victory. Recognition that American industrial capacity had been the ultimate weapon defeating Germany. The productive capacity symbolized by facilities like Willow Run, one bomber every 63 minutes. Not just a production rate. Evidence of systematic industrial organization operating at scales that made German defeat inevitable once American mobilization reached full capacity. The lesson that Paul Nitze carried from that interrogation would shape American defense policy for decades. That modern wars between industrial powers are ultimately won by the side with greater productive capacity. That material superiority, when sufficiently overwhelming, determines outcomes more reliably than strategy or tactics or courage. That America's ability to outproduce any rival was its greatest strategic advantage. And that maintaining that advantage required continuous industrial investment, technological innovation, efficient production systems. The interrogation of Albert Speer in May 1945 revealed what German military intelligence had known, but German leadership had refused to accept. American industrial capacity was decisive. But the story of how that realization came to German commanders on the ground was written not in Berlin conference rooms but in Belgian forests, French hedgerows, and German cities where the physical evidence of American production arrived in overwhelming quantities. December 17, 1944. Stavelot, Belgium. SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Paper stood in a town square watching his men refuel tanks, American tanks using American fuel. His Kampfgruppe Piper had captured a fuel depot at Bullingen that morning, 50,000 gallons, enough to keep his spearhead moving west toward the Meuse River. But what struck Piper as he walked through the captured depot was not just the fuel, it was everything else. American supplies stacked everywhere, ammunition crates, medical supplies, rations, winter clothing, everything organized, everything labeled, everything abundant. Paper picked up one of the ration boxes. K-ration, meal combat individual, breakfast unit. He opened it. Inside was a can of chopped ham and eggs, hard biscuits, a chocolate bar, 4 cigarettes, instant coffee, sugar tablets, chewing gum, a wooden spoon, matches, toilet paper, can opener. Everything a soldier needed for one meal, packaged in a waterproof box the size of a book, weighing less than 1 pound. No cooking required, no field kitchen needed, just open and eat. Paper had commanded combat units since 1940. He knew what German soldiers received as rations. The standard German field ration, when it arrived at all, required cooking. It came in bulk containers needing field kitchens to prepare. the bread was hard, the meat was mostly fat. Quality had been declining since 1943. By late 1944, frontline units were lucky to receive anything. Piper's own Kampfgruppe had left Germany with 3 days of rations. Those were gone. His men had been eating whatever they could find, captured American food, food taken from Belgian civilians. Some units had slaughtered horses. He looked at the K-ration box to his hand. The manufacturing date stamped on the bottom said October 1944, 2 months old. The Americans were producing these rations so recently that supplies manufactured weeks ago were already at the front. Piper did calculations in his head. If every American soldier received 3 of these boxes per day, that was 3 meals. If there were 10 million American soldiers worldwide, that meant 30 million individual meal boxes every day. 900 million per month. The industrial capacity required to produce that number was staggering. Germany had never produced anything on that scale. The entire German armaments industry had been mobilized for total war since 1939. They produced tanks, aircraft, ammunition, but they could not produce enough food to feed their own soldiers properly. And here the Americans were packaging individual meals in waterproof boxes with luxuries like chewing gum. Piper had fought the Soviets in the East. He had seen Soviet logistics, mass production, crude but effective. Endless columns of trucks, factories in the Urals beyond German reach. The Soviets could replace losses faster than Germany could inflict them. But Soviet logistics looked primitive compared to this. The Soviets moved supplies in bulk. The Americans packaged everything individually. Every item Piper examined showed careful engineering, waterproof packaging, compact design, long shelf life. This was not emergency improvisation. This was industrial planning. An SS Sturmbannführer arrived with reports. His battalion was running low on fuel and ammunition. Piper told him the fuel was being distributed now. Ammunition would come from captured American stocks. They had found crates of American 75mm shells that fit German guns. Take what you need. Keep moving. The officer asked about food. His men had not eaten since yesterday. Piper pointed to the rations. American K rations. Take as many as you need. The men should eat now and carry more. The officer distributed boxes to his tank crews. The men opened them and ate. Piper watched them. Experienced soldiers, veterans of France and Russia. They were eating American emergency field rations and treating them like feast food because compared to what they normally received, it was. The refueling finished at 09:30. Piper gave the order to move out. The Kampfgruppe formed into march column and headed northwest towards Stavelot. 14 kilometers. The mission was to reach the Meuse River, take the bridges, split the Allied armies in 2. But to do that required fuel. Piper's intelligence map showed a major fuel depot at Stavelot, larger than Bullingen, 3 million gallons according to the report. The Kampfgruppe reached Stavelot at 1200 hours. American forces defended the bridge. The battle lasted 3 hours. Piper's forces eventually forced the Americans back across the river. German engineers checked the bridge. Not demolished. Intact. Lucky. Without that bridge, the entire advance would stop. Piper's units crossed and entered western Stavelot. They searched for the fuel depot. Intelligence said it was here, near the town. Large quantities. Enough fuel to keep the offensive moving for days. They found nothing. Piper sent reconnaissance teams in all directions. Check the outskirts. Check the roads. Check every building. The fuel depot had to be somewhere. The Americans would not abandon 3 million gallons of gasoline. They would either defend it or destroy it. But Piper's men found no evidence of either. At 1500 hours, one reconnaissance officer reported finding small amounts. Jerry cans scattered along roads north of the town. Maybe a few thousand gallons total, not the major depot, not what intelligence had promised. Piper made a decision. The fuel depot either did not exist or the Americans had already evacuated it. Either way, he could not wait. His Kampfgruppe had enough, fuel to continue the advance. Not much, but enough. The mission was to reach the Meuse River. Every hour stopped was an hour wasted. Move on. The Kampfgruppe departed Stavelot at 1600 hours and continued west. What Piper did not know was that the fuel depot existed. It was there. 3,200,000 gallons of gasoline stored in 5-gallon jerry cans stacked along a 5-kilometer stretch of road, Depot Number 2 and Depot Number 3. Located 800 meters north of the road Piper had used to approach Stavelot. 300 meters away, Piper had driven past 3 million gallons of fuel and never saw it. The Americans had not hidden the depot. They had not camouflaged it. The jerry cans were stacked in plain sight along the roadside, thousands of them, millions of gallons right there. But Piper expected a fuel depot to look like German depots looked: storage tanks, buildings, vehicles, infrastructure. The American depot was just jerry cans, stacked, waiting. No guards, no vehicles, no buildings, just fuel in portable containers ready to be distributed wherever needed. Piper rolled past it, looking for something that looked like a depot. He never found it because he was looking for the wrong thing. After the war, an American historian named Major Ken Heckler interviewed Piper. Heckler told Piper about the depot. 3 million gallons. 300 meters from your route. Piper shrugged. He said he expected fuel to be piled in town squares like at Bullingen. When he did not find it in Stavelot, he assumed the Americans had moved it. That missed depot changed everything. With 3 million gallons, Piper could have refueled his entire Kampfgruppe multiple times. He could have refueled other German units. He could have kept the offensive moving. The fuel crisis that eventually stopped the German advance would not have existed. But Piper never found it. By December 23rd, Piper's offensive had stopped. His Kampfgruppe was surrounded. No fuel, no ammunition, no supplies, no way forward, no way back. German commanders held a conference, discussing options. All options were bad. They could not advance. No fuel. They could not defend indefinitely. No ammunition. They could not retreat with vehicles. No fuel. They could attempt to break out on foot. Abandon everything. Tanks, half-tracks, vehicles, wounded, who could not walk. Everything. Piper made the decision. Break out on foot. Destroy the vehicles. March east through the forest. Try to reach German lines. It was the only option that gave his men any chance of survival. The breakout began at 0200 hours on December 24th. 800 German soldiers moving through darkness, through snow, through forest. No vehicles, no heavy weapons, just small arms, and whatever each man could carry. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Piper abandoned 7 Tiger II tanks at La Glaise, 50 medium tanks, 70 half-tracks, 135 vehicles. Everything immobilized because the fuel tanks were empty. Some of the most advanced armored vehicles in the world, left behind, useless. The tanks were intact, functional, loaded with ammunition, but without gasoline, they were just metal sculptures. The fuel depot at Stavelot. 3 million gallons, 300 meters away, never found. That single logistics failure symbolized the larger German collapse, January 1945, prisoner of war camp, France. General Hasso von Manteuffel sat in an interrogation room answering questions from American intelligence officers. Manteuffel commanded 5th Panzer Army during the Ardennes offensive, professional soldier, career officer, Eastern Front veteran. He had opposed the Ardennes plan from the beginning. The American officers asked detailed questions. What were German objectives? What resources were allocated? What went wrong? Manteuffel answered honestly. The war was over for him. No reason to lie. His answers would become foreign military studies manuscripts, official documents, historical record. Manteuffel explained that he and Field Marshal Model had argued against Hitler's plan. They wanted a limited offensive, smaller objectives, realistic goals. Hitler wanted Antwerp. Cross the Meuse River, split the Allied armies, force negotiations. Hitler's plan was strategically impossible with available resources. The fuel allocation made success impossible. 5 million gallons for 3 armies, 1,400 tanks, thousands of vehicles. Basic mathematics showed it was insufficient. The planning assumed capturing American fuel depots. That assumption was a gamble. You cannot base military operations on capturing enemy supplies. What if the Americans destroy the depots? What if you cannot find them? What if they defend them successfully? All 3 scenarios happened. Some depots were destroyed. Some were never found. Some were defended. The fuel crisis began immediately and never stopped. Manteuffel said his tank units were crying for fuel as early as December 19th, second day of the offensive. Units were already running dry. Supply trucks were not reaching the front. Captured fuel was insufficient. The entire offensive was grinding to a halt because panzers sat immobilized, waiting for gasoline that never arrived. The American interrogators asked about German logistics in general. Manteuffel was frank. German logistics had collapsed, not just during the Ardennes offensive. The entire system. Since 1943, maybe earlier, the Eastern Front destroyed German logistics. The distances were too great, the roads were too poor, Soviet resistance was too strong. German trucks broke down faster than they could be repaired. Railways were constantly under attack. The Wehrmacht became dependent on horses, hundreds of thousands of castrant horses pulling supply wagons like in 1870. By late 1944, some German divisions had more horses than German divisions in World War I. Mechanized warfare fought with horse-drawn logistics. The contradiction was fatal. Tanks moved faster than horses. Panzers could advance 20 kilometers in an hour. Supply wagons needed a full day to cover the same distance. Combat units outran their logistics and then stopped, immobilized, waiting for supplies that arrived too late or not at all. The horse dependence created additional problems. Horses required food, approximately 20 pounds of fodder per day per animal. A division with 5,000 horses needed 50 tons of horse feed daily just to sustain its logistics system. That feed had to be transported on roads already congested with military traffic. Horses also died. From exhaustion, from air attacks, from inadequate feed. Dead horses blocked roads and required burial or disposal. American logistics used trucks exclusively. Trucks did not require daily feeding. They sat idle when not needed without consuming resources. They moved faster, carried more, required less maintenance personnel than horse-drawn wagons. The American truck fleet numbered in hundreds of thousands, all standardized designs, all using interchangeable parts, all supported by massive spare parts supply system. Allied strategic bombing made everything worse. Every rail junction was a target. Every bridge was destroyed. Every road was strafed by fighter bombers. German logistics units could only move at night. Daylight movement meant certain death from the air. American P-47 seconds and P-51 seconds attacked anything that moved. Supply columns were burned. Fuel trucks were destroyed. Food convoys were shot up. German production could not replace losses. Factories were bombed. Raw materials were scarce. Skilled workers were conscripted into combat units. The industrial base was crumbling. What the factories did produce often could not reach the front because transportation networks were destroyed. Manteuffel contrasted this with American logistics. The Americans had secure supply lines. Factories in America were safe from bombing, 3,000 miles from the fighting. Producing war materials at rates Germany could never match. Ships crossed the Atlantic constantly, delivering supplies. The port of Antwerp alone handled more tonnage per month than all German ports combined. American supply depots were everywhere. Fuel, ammunition, food, spare parts, everything organized, abundant, redundant. Multiple depots meant losing one did not matter. Standardized containers meant soldiers could handle supplies without special training. Abundant production meant waste was acceptable if it increased speed of distribution. German logistics had no excess capacity. Every supply dump was critical. Every fuel truck was precious. Every ration was counted. The Wehrmacht operated on the edge of collapse constantly. One disruption meant crisis. Two disruptions meant disaster. The American officers asked Manteuffel when he knew Germany would lose the war. Manteuffel said he knew in 1943 after Kursk. The Wehrmacht could still win battles, but winning battles was not enough. Germany needed to win the war. That required resources Germany did not have: industrial capacity, oil, food, manpower, time. The Americans had all of those things: functionally unlimited industrial capacity, secure oil supplies from Texas and the Middle East, agricultural production that fed both military and civilians, a population of 100 to 30 million, time to mobilize that population and deploy it. Germany had lost the resource war before the shooting war ended. Once America entered the conflict, German defeat was inevitable. Not immediate, not easy, but inevitable. The mathematics were simple. America could produce more tanks, more planes, more bullets, more food, more everything than Germany could destroy. Eventually, American material superiority would grind German resistance into dust. The Ardennes offensive was a final desperate gamble. Use the last strategic reserves. Achieve one dramatic victory. Force the Allies to negotiate. Hitler believed will and courage could overcome material disadvantage. Manteuffel knew better. Will and courage matter, but logistics matter more. An army without supplies cannot fight regardless of how brave its soldiers are. The offensive failed. German losses were catastrophic: 600 tanks destroyed or abandoned, 34,000 killed, 60,000 wounded or missing. The Wehrmacht's last mobile reserves were gone. After the Ardennes, Germany could only retreat. No more offensives, no more grand strategic plans. Just fighting delaying actions until the inevitable end. Manteuffel wrote detailed reports on the Ardennes offensive, 5th Panzer Army operations, planning, execution, lessons learned. 148 pages. Then another one. 161 pages. Foreign Military Studies manuscripts, B-151 and B-151A. Professional military analysis, balanced assessments. Credit to American performance. Honest evaluation of German failures. His tone was clinical, detached, professional. He faulted German shortcomings. He credited Allied successes. No excuses. No propaganda, just factual analysis. This is what happened. This is why it happened. These were the mistakes. These were the consequences. Other German generals were less honest in their post-war statements. They blamed Hitler. They blamed weather. They blamed bad luck. They blamed everything except the fundamental problem. Germany lacked the industrial and logistical capacity to sustain modern warfare against opponents with superior resources. Manteuffel did not make excuses. He stated facts. Germany lost because Germany was outproduced, outsupplied, and outsustained. The German army in December 1944 was still capable of tactical excellence. But tactical excellence without strategic resources meant eventual defeat. April 1945. American Interrogation Center, Germany. Joachim Paper sat across from American interrogators, answering questions about Kampfgruppe Paper's operations. The war was ending. Germany was collapsing. Piper would soon face war crimes charges for the Malmedy massacre. But for now, the Americans wanted information about tactical operations. Piper described the offensive in detail: planning, execution, problems encountered, decisions made. He was cooperative, professional. He answered questions accurately. The Americans asked about fuel. When did you run out? Where did you refuel? What depots did you capture? Paper explained the fuel crisis. Bullingen provided 50,000 gallons, enough to reach Stavelot. But at Stavelot, he found no major depot. Small amounts scattered along roads. Not enough. He continued west with minimal fuel, reached Starmont, ran, completely dry. An American officer asked if Piper knew about the depot at Stavelot. 3 million gallons, 800 meters from your route. Piper said he did not know. The interrogator showed him a map, pointed to the depot location, explained that thousands of jerry cans were stacked along that road, right there. Paper passed within 300 meters. Piper looked at the map for a long moment. Then he shrugged, smiled slightly, said in English, "I am sorry." The interrogator asked why he missed it. Piper explained he expected fuel to be concentrated in the town, piled in the square like at Bullingen. When he did not find it, he assumed the Americans had evacuated it. He never thought to look for jerry cans stacked along a roadside. The interrogator made notes. Paper continued, describing subsequent operations. The advance to Stoumont, the encirclement, the decision to break out on foot, the abandonment of all vehicles, the retreat through the forest back to German lines. Piper never expressed regret about the missed depot. No emotion, no frustration, just a tactical error explained in professional terms. He missed an opportunity. That happens in war. Move on. But that missed opportunity changed the battle. With 3 million gallons, Kampfgruppe Paper could have refueled multiple times, could have continued advancing, could have reached the Meuse River, could have achieved the breakthrough that was the offensive's objective. Or maybe not. Even with unlimited fuel, Piper still faced American resistance. American air power, once the weather cleared. American reinforcements moving faster than he could advance. Logistics was critical, but not everything. Fuel alone would not have won the battle, but it would have changed the outcome. The Germans would have advanced further, caused more casualties, captured more territory. The battle would have lasted longer. The strategic situation would have been different, all because Piper drove past 3 million gallons of gasoline and never saw it. The depot was there, visible, accessible, undefended. He passed within 300 meters and missed it completely because he was looking for something that looked like a German depot, organized infrastructure, buildings, guards. The American depot was just fuel stacked, ready, waiting, no infrastructure needed. That was American logistics, simple, efficient, abundant. No wasted effort on structures that did not contribute to the mission. Just put the supplies where they are needed. Soldiers will figure out how to use them. German logistics was more complicated. Formal structures, designated supply points, official procedures. The system worked when everything functioned correctly, but it was fragile. Disrupt any part and the whole system failed. American logistics was resilient, redundant, flexible. Multiple depots meant losing one did not matter. Standardized containers meant soldiers could handle supplies without special training. Abundant production meant waste was acceptable if it increased speed of distribution. These were fundamental differences in approach. German logistics emphasized control and efficiency. American logistics emphasized abundance and speed. In a long war, the American approach won. The K-ration symbolized that system, not the reason America won, but a representation of why America won. 105 million K-rations produced in 1944 alone, each containing 2,830 calories across 3 individually packaged meals, manufactured in American factories safe from bombing, shipped across the Atlantic, distributed to soldiers fighting on multiple continents simultaneously. German soldiers opened these boxes and saw food. They should have seen industrial capacity, transportation networks, an economic system that produced millions of meal packages monthly and delivered them anywhere needed. The small luxuries included chocolate, cigarettes, chewing gum, demonstrated excess capacity. America could afford to add non-essentials because their production was that abundant. German rations by 1944 reflected a failing system, inadequate nutrition, poor quality, irregular distribution, dependence on field kitchens that could not always operate. Everything reflected resource scarcity and industrial strain. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, Wehrmacht soldiers were starving. Rations had collapsed. Supply systems had disintegrated. Many German prisoners of war gained weight in American captivity because they received regular meals for the first time in months. One German prisoner said, "When I was captured, I weighed 128 pounds. After 2 years as an American prisoner of war, I weighed 185. I had gotten so fat you could no longer see my eyes. American prison camp rations were better than German combat rations. The Battle of the Bulge ended in January 1945. German forces withdrew to their starting positions. American forces counterattacked. By March, the Allies had crossed the Rhine. By April, they were surrounding Berlin. By May, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The Ardennes offensive consumed Germany's last strategic reserves without achieving strategic objectives. It delayed Allied advances by several weeks and inflicted casualties, but it did not change the war's outcome. The elite units committed to the Ardennes were the best Germany had left. After the offensive, those units were gone, destroyed, scattered, incapable of sustained operations. American forces grew stronger in that same period. More divisions arrived from the United States. More equipment, more supplies. The logistics system continued functioning efficiently. When Germany surrendered, American forces in Europe were at peak strength and capability. Germany lost World War II because it could not sustain modern warfare against opponents with superior industrial logistical capacity. Strategic errors and tactical mistakes contributed. But the fundamental disparity was economic. The United States and Soviet Union both possessed industrial economies capable of producing war materials faster than Germany could destroy them. Germany did not. That disparity determined the outcome. Consider vehicle production. The United States manufactured 400,000 trucks during the war. Germany produced 140,000. American factories delivered 63,000 tanks. German factories delivered 49,000. But German tanks required more maintenance, more fuel, more spare parts. American tanks were simpler, more reliable, easier to maintain in field conditions. The gap widened in aircraft production. America built 300,000 military aircraft during the war. Germany built 120,000. American bombers struck German factories with impunity, while American fighters controlled European skies. German aircraft production declined throughout 1944. Despite desperate efforts to increase output, Allied bombing destroyed factories faster than Germany could build new ones. German soldiers at the Battle of the Bulge understood this disparity. They saw American equipment abandoned intact because retreating forces had no time to destroy it. They captured American supply dumps containing more food and ammunition than they had seen in months. They wore American uniforms because German logistics could not deliver adequate winter clothing. Every interaction with captured American supplies reinforced the same lesson. The enemy had everything. Germany had nothing. That knowledge affected German combat effectiveness. Soldiers who know their side is losing fight differently than soldiers who believe victory is possible. German soldiers in December 1944 fought bravely. But bravery has limits when you are cold and hungry, and know that even if you win today's battle, tomorrow will bring more American soldiers with more American supplies. American soldiers had opposite expectations. They knew their logistics system worked. They knew if they were surrounded, supplies would be airdropped. They knew if their unit took casualties, replacements would arrive. They knew wounded would receive proper medical care. That confidence enabled sustained resistance even in desperate situations. The Battle of the Bulge demonstrated this repeatedly. American units surrounded at Bastogne received airdrops. American forces pushed back at St. Vith received reinforcements. American casualties were evacuated to hospitals with adequate medical supplies. The logistics system functioned under pressure. German logistics collapsed under the same pressure. The final months of the war confirmed what the Battle of the Bulge had demonstrated. Germany could not sustain military operations against an enemy with functioning logistics. As German supply lines disintegrated completely, Wehrmacht units surrendered en masse, not because they lacked courage or tactical skill, but because they lacked food, fuel, ammunition, and hope. When American forces entered Germany in 1945, they found a country whose infrastructure had been destroyed by strategic bombing. Factories were rubble, rail yards were craters, roads were impassable. The industrial base that had supported German military operations no longer existed. Meanwhile, American factories continued producing war materials at full capacity. The economic war had been decided long before the shooting stopped. The K-ration encapsulated this reality in a form German soldiers could hold in their hands. A waterproof cardboard box containing 3 individually packaged meals with luxuries like chocolate and cigarettes. The manufacturing date showing recent production. The sheer abundance visible in every captured American supply depot. This was not just food. This was proof of industrial capacity that Germany never possessed, and by 1944 could never acquire. Logistics won the war. Tactics mattered. Strategy mattered. Leadership mattered. But logistics provided the foundation enabling everything else. An army without adequate supplies cannot execute tactics regardless of how skilled its soldiers are, cannot implement strategy regardless of how brilliant its generals are, cannot sustain combat operations regardless of how motivated its troops are. Back at Willow Run in September 1944, another B-24 Liberator rolled off the assembly line, engines running, ready to fly. 63 minutes later, another. Then another. Then another. Hour after hour. Shift after shift. Day after day. The massive factory operated continuously. Raw materials entered one end. Finished bombers emerged from the other. By the time the war ended in August 1945, Willow Run had produced 8,685 B-24 Liberators, half of all B-24 seconds, manufactured during the war. Those aircraft bombed German factories. They destroyed German transportation networks. They helped establish air superiority over Europe. They contributed to the strategic bombing campaign that crippled German fuel production. They represented American industrial capacity operating at scales German planners had considered impossible. One bomber every 63 minutes was not just a production statistic. It was evidence of systematic industrial organization that made German defeat inevitable once American mobilization reached full capacity. German intelligence knew about Willow Run. Intelligence reports mentioned the facility, but knowing a factory existed was different from comprehending what that factory's output meant for the strategic balance. German analysts could read statistics. They could not always interpret implications. Production numbers on paper did not convey the psychological impact of understanding that your opponent could replace losses faster than you could inflict them. That their factories were safe while yours burned. That their soldiers ate better as prisoners than your soldiers ate in combat. That no amount of tactical skill or fighting spirit could overcome such overwhelming material disadvantage. That was the lesson written in K-rations and jerrycans. In fuel depots that looked different from what German commanders expected. In supply systems designed for abundance rather than control. In logistics that emphasized speed over efficiency. In production lines that manufactured bombers with the same systematic precision that had once produced automobiles. American industrial capacity was not just larger than German capacity. It was fundamentally different in organization, philosophy, and execution. When Joachim Peiper drove past 3 million gallons of fuel at Stavelot, he was looking for the wrong thing: German logistics, German organization, German infrastructure. He could not find what he sought because American logistics operated on different principles that emphasized flexibility over formality, distribution over concentration, pragmatic effectiveness over procedural correctness. Those principles, applied across the entire American war effort, created a logistics system that sustained global warfare on multiple continents simultaneously, while German logistics collapsed, supporting operations on 2 fronts. The title of this story suggested a German spy counted Ford's B-24 production and reported 1 bomber every 63 minutes before being arrested. The historical reality was more complex and more revealing. German intelligence did collect information on American industrial production. The Duquesne Spy Ring, Operation Pastorius, networks in Latin America, agents gathering economic data, reports reaching Berlin documenting American capacity, but the intelligence failed in interpretation, not collection. German analysts received accurate data. They struggled to accept what that data meant. Production rates that seemed impossible, industrial capacity that exceeded German capacity by factors of 2, 3, 5 to 1, depending on the category. An economic system that could fight a global war while civilian consumption increased. Germany's failure was not intelligence collection. Germany's failure was comprehension. They could not understand what they were seeing because it contradicted everything their experience told them was possible. You cannot mass-produce complex aircraft like automobiles. Except Ford did exactly that at Willow Run. You cannot package individual meals for millions of soldiers with luxuries included. Except American factories produced 105 million K-rations in 1944 alone. You cannot maintain supply lines across 3,000 miles of ocean while fighting on multiple continents. Except American logistics did precisely that continuously from 1942 through 1945. The story of German intelligence and American production is not about spies counting bombers. It is about a fundamental miscalculation of American industrial potential. About assumptions formed in peacetime that proved catastrophically wrong in war. About the difference between knowing facts and understanding implications. About how material superiority, when sufficiently overwhelming, makes tactical skill and strategic planning ultimately irrelevant to final outcomes. One bomber every 63 minutes. 8,685 B-24 Liberators from Willow Run alone. 300,000 aircraft total from American factories, 400,000 trucks, 63,000 tanks, 105 million K-rations. Numbers that German intelligence reported. Numbers that German leadership struggled to believe. Numbers that made German defeat mathematically inevitable once American mobilization reached full capacity. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.